Hello, fellow Vanishies. So I'm here today with a quick mini update on one of the cases we have previously covered. The Vanishing of Faith Hedgepeth, if any of you remember. For those of you that don't, Faith was a 19-year-old college student attending University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in September of 2012 when she was brutally murdered in the early morning hours in her apartment she shared with her close friend Rosario, also known as Karina. The case had so much evidence, including DNA left at the scene, the murder weapon. There was a note left suspected of being written by the perpetrator. We had her friend's ex-boyfriend who seemed to really have it out for Faith at the time. And then the shady-ass behavior of her friend the night she was murdered. It was just a lot of fuckery with this case that was just not adding up. Well, as of September 16th of this year, about 10 days ago, I'd say, Chapel Hill police have made an arrest regarding this case. 28-year-old Miguel Salguero Olivares of Durham, North Carolina, has been arrested on a first-degree murder charge. Now, I find that extremely interesting. I can't even talk, I'm so excited. But I'll elaborate on that in just a minute here. Now, my original theory was that this was a crime of opportunity. The murder weapon being a giant bottle of rum that was in their apartment that they owned pretty much confirms that, in my opinion. And Faith's friend Karina, in my opinion, had to have had some sort of relation to the crime. How big or how small? At the time, I wasn't completely sure, and to this day, I'm still not completely sure. But my opinion still stands, even after this arrest. Now, do I think Karina is the one who swung the bottle? No. But that doesn't clear her of involvement in my mind. Not even close. But from my understanding, at the time of the crime, investigators collected over 200 samples of DNA from the scene. There was obviously DNA on Faith herself, but there was also DNA in other parts of the apartment. There was DNA found on a pen that was suspected of writing the note that they found, as well as a few other places in the apartment. Now, all of these samples were allegedly tested against over 700 people throughout the entirety of this investigation, all of which who were ruled out. Police have matched the DNA on the pen, though, to the DNA that was found on Faith, and they are from the same person. This is interesting because Olivares was arrested after his DNA came back as a match to the DNA found at the scene. Now, if it was this specific DNA that I'm talking about, the DNA that matched the pen as well as the DNA on Faith, this obviously speaks volumes. But if this is just DNA that, say, was found on a kitchen counter or, somewhere a little bit more obsolete, there's probably more wiggle room there to explain it away. However, reports state that Olivares is claiming he has never attended the university, but more importantly, that he has no idea who Faith was and had never met her before. His mother is standing by these claims as well. His family and friends say that they don't believe he is capable of committing this crime. Olivares was confirmed to be at the nightclub The Thrill, the same nightclub that Faith and Karina were at the night she was murdered, which is kind of having police leaning towards the idea that this may be a possible connection. Now, in my original episode, I did go over the fact that there were several people of interest, of which were unnamed, I might add, who had remained on police radar as possible suspects. From what I gathered from both media reports and statements made by a private investigator familiar with the case, Olivares had come up in passing during the investigation, but he was never actually considered a suspect. His DNA was only recently tested after a drunk driving incident last month that led to his DNA being collected. When his DNA was entered into the database, it matched with the samples that were submitted from Faith's case that at the time were submitted under an unidentified source. Now, The investigators have arrested Oliveras for the first-degree murder that I mentioned earlier. Whether or not the DA plans to continue with first-degree murder charges is yet to be seen. That would essentially be based on how strong of a case they have to support first-degree murder. What a lot of people do not know is the difference between first-degree murder and, say, second-degree murder or any other murder charge for that matter. First-degree murder requires there to be ample proof that either premeditation was present or that the murder was willful and or deliberate. While first-degree murder is considered a federal offense, its requirements do slightly vary from state to state as well. So the definition I just gave is that of North Carolina's requirements to meet first-degree murder. Second-degree murder simply lacks that. It is murder without premeditation or planning and is more of a spur-of-the-moment act, yet is still with intention. So, for example, if I were to plot to kill, say, Shadow, and I drew up a list of supplies I needed to purchase, and I planned a way to lure him into a dark alley where I then proceeded to stab the living crap out of him, 100% would be first-degree murder. Now, on the other hand, if Shadow and I, say, got into an argument one night over what to have for dinner, I want sushi, he wants burgers, which is a very common argument in our house. And say the fight escalated to the point where I grabbed the kitchen knife off the counter and I plunge it into him. We now have second-degree murder. The reason why I am explaining this is the police arrested him on first degree. So whatever they have on him, they felt it was enough to support that this guy was more than likely planning to kill Faith when he came in contact with her. Premeditation doesn't necessarily need to be a days in advance type of thing either. He easily could have seen her at the club and intent was established then to harm her. Obviously, without knowing what the police have, aside from his DNA, it's really hard to know what they have that led them to first degree, but it does allow us to ponder and it is intriguing. Now, this case could go to the DA, who could look at it and say, I don't have enough here to take to 12 jurors confidently and say first degree. However, I do have enough for second degree. His charges could then be lowered to second degree. That's also where you start getting into the whole plea deal between DAs and defense attorneys and stuff like that, which is just a little too far ahead of the current situation. But I decided to throw that out there for those of you who are maybe curious how that works. But regardless, this guy is claiming he never knew her and that he never met her. That's pretty hard to get behind, pal, when your DNA is all over the crime scene and on the victim herself. First degree does seem interesting, though, when the weapon was a weapon from the apartment. Police did say, though, that this case is nowhere near over. They still feel there is more to the story here and that there is more people still involved, and honestly, I agree. The connection is missing. Why Faith? What ties this guy to her? I don't see this being a random attack. I don't think the guy just went eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and it landed on Faith that night. I 100% do not believe that's what happened here. Also, where does Karina tie into all of this? Now, I usually don't like the idea of gunning so hard against someone when I'm not a detective, I don't have the credentials, and I'm missing a lot of information here. But in my honest-to-God gut feeling, there's literally no way she is completely hands-off of this. She left the club with Faith that night, claiming she had, stomach ache or the shits or something like that. But then she turns around and comes home and just starts calling all of these dudes for booty calls in the middle of the night. She ends up leaving at 4:30 a.m., which, by the way, was well after the downstairs, can't talk, neighbor heard some suspicious thumping. She leaves the door unlocked, despite the issues that they were having with her violent ex-boyfriend repeatedly breaking into the apartment, to the point where her and Faith considered getting a restraining order, and they got the locks changed. I'm sorry, but if you go to such great lengths to secure your home and a sense of safety, why are you going to leave that night, which, by the way, coincidentally happens to be the night your friend's murdered, with the doors unlocked? there's no level of explaining there that can justify those actions as not suspicious, in my opinion. I'm sorry. They may have found the guy who committed the crime with his own hands, but I don't think they found the murderer. Not yet. Faith's murder was not a random act. Her murder screams personal to me. It always has. I'll definitely be following this case closely and the updates that are to come, should there be anything new. In the meantime, stay tuned, guys.